In 1995, a young mother vanished from her bed without a trace. No noise, no clues, just absence. For years, her family lived in a quiet ache until the day her daughter, now 15, locked eyes with a familiar face in a mall crowd. It was her mother. And she wasn't alone. She was smiling beside her stepbrother. Ashfield, Oregon was the kind of place people drove through slowly. A small wooded town where porch lights stayed on past dusk and neighbors still brought casseroles during hard times. Life here didn't change quickly. It moved at the pace of the seasons. Thomas and Margaret Houghton were part of that rhythm. At 30 and 25, they were young. Bright-eyed parents raising 3 children in a white 2-story house tucked at the end of Sycamore Lane. Their home was loud with laughter, art projects, and backyard sprinklers. Margaret kept the garden in bloom, Thomas kept the tool shed stocked, and together they were raising Anna, a clever 7-year-old who noticed everything. Lily, 5, sweet and gentle. And Jake, a toddler who spoke in bursts of joy and ran like he was made of springs. Margaret was the center of it all. She carried calm in the storm. She could juggle a pot of boiling pasta, a ringing phone, and a crayon-covered couch cushion without losing her warmth. Her hands were rarely still folding laundry, braiding hair, planting tomatoes. On a warm night in July 1995, she tucked in her children one by one, smoothed their blankets, kissed their foreheads, and whispered soft wishes for good dreams. Then she turned in for the night beside her husband, the open window pulling in the smell of grass and summer air. By sunrise, she was gone. The covers beside Thomas were untouched. Her shoes were still by the door, her toothbrush still damp. From the night before, there was no sign of her in the house or the yard, no packed bag, no goodbye note. Just the silence that follows something inexplicable. Thomas thought maybe she'd stepped out early for air. She did that sometimes when she couldn't sleep. But after 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour, something shifted in his chest, a low-spreading panic. He called the neighbors first, then the police. By midday, the street was crawling with volunteers. In flashing lights, officers combed the woods behind the house, dogs sniffed near the creek, and helicopters circled overhead. The news vans came and went. People whispered, offering theories and casseroles, but none of it helped. There were no leads, no struggle, no trace, just a missing mother and a family frozen in place. Everyone searched for her. Friends, extended family. Even Charles, Margaret's stepbrother, drove up from Grants Pass the day after she vanished. He stood on the lawn in his worn-out jacket, offering condolences with a distant expression. He told Thomas he'd last seen her a week prior when he'd stopped by to drop off some books for the kids. He said Margaret had seemed fine, maybe tired, but not upset. He didn't linger long. The police questioned him, like they did everyone else, but Charles was quiet, respectful, and clean. Nothing about him suggested a threat. Eventually, the searches stopped, the posters faded, and life painfully moved on. Thomas never remarried. He couldn't. He poured himself into the children instead. Mornings became mechanical. Breakfast, school drop-offs, work, dinner, homework. Nights were hardest. Anna would sometimes wake crying. Lily slept with the light on, and Jake asked why Mommy was taking so long to come home. No one ever really answered. Years passed. Anna, now 15, was tall and perceptive, with a gaze much older than her age. Lily was 13, soft-spoken, and Jake was 11, full of questions. They had grown up inside the shadow of that one vanished night, learning to live with silence as part of their story. Then, on a rainy spring afternoon in 2003, everything changed. It was a regular Sunday. Anna and her friend Cassie had gone to Westbridge Mall to shop for new jeans. They stopped for frozen yogurt, browsed a shoe store, and wandered through the central corridor. That's when Anna saw her. At first, it didn't register, just a flicker of recognition, a familiar tilt of the head. Then her heart stopped. The woman walking past the jewelry kiosk looked exactly like her mother, not the young mother from their family photo albums, but older, unmistakable. The shape of her face, the way she tucked her hair, even the curve of her smile. She was holding hands with a man, tall, in his late 30s, wearing a leather jacket and jeans. His hand was placed gently at the small of her back, familiar, comfortable, like they belonged together. They laughed as they passed a shop window. Anna couldn't breathe. She dropped her bag and began walking fast, then faster, pushing through crowds. But by the time she rounded the corner, they were gone. She stood there, dazed, staring down the empty hallway, unsure if her mind was playing tricks or if the past had just walked straight through the present. When she got home, she didn't wait. She told her father everything, the woman, the mall, the man. Thomas listened without blinking, his fingers tightening slightly around the glass of water he held. But he didn't dismiss her. He believed her. "What did she look like?" he asked softly. "Like Mom," Anna whispered. "Older, but it was her, I'm sure." He sat at the table long after she went to bed, staring out the window. Something about the quiet in his posture made Anna think he wasn't as surprised as he should have been. From that moment forward, the past was no longer resting. It was knocking. Anna didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, playing the moment over and over, the way her mother walked. The curve of her smile, the stranger's hand resting gently on her back. It wasn't just resemblance, it was recognition. Her mother hadn't just looked similar, she was Margaret Houghton. But why hadn't she said anything? Did she see Anna standing there? And if she did, why didn't she come running? The next morning, Anna skipped school and stayed close to her father. Thomas moved through the kitchen with quiet purpose, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. He didn't ask more questions, nor did he try to soothe her doubt. Instead, he went into the garage and pulled out a dust-covered shoebox filled with newspaper clippings. Flyers and old photos, the pieces of a search that once consumed his every breath. He laid the box on the kitchen table. "I kept everything," he said without looking at her. Even when the world stopped caring. Anna slowly reached inside, her mother's missing poster, a local paper with the headline, "Ashfield Mother Vanishes Without a Trace," a birthday card Margaret had. Never finished writing, dated July 15th, 1995, 3 days before she disappeared. "She never would have left us," Anna whispered. "Not on purpose." Thomas nodded. "No, she wouldn't." Later that afternoon, Anna and Thomas drove back to the mall. They circled the area twice and nothing. There's no sign of the couple, no security. Footage available without a warrant. They asked a few kiosk workers. No one had seen anything unusual. It was like chasing smoke. But Anna wasn't ready to let it go. She became obsessed. She carried a sketch of her mother's aged face in her backpack, drawn as best she could from memory and the mall sighting. She returned to the shopping center every weekend, sat on benches, scanned crowds, rode the escalators up and down, hoping to glimpse that same familiar figure. For weeks, nothing until something shifted. It was a quiet Saturday, nearly 6. Weeks after the first sighting, Anna was standing outside a bookstore near the food court when she saw him, not her mother, but the man who had been with her. He was alone this time, walking with confidence, wearing sunglasses, despite the indoor lighting. He paused briefly near a newsstand and checked his watch. Then, just as Anna was about to approach him, he turned. For a split second their eyes met. He didn't look confused or surprised. He looked like someone who'd been expecting this. Then he turned sharply and walked away, briskly, deliberately. Cutting through the crowd toward the parking structure, Anna followed, her legs trembling. She weaved through people, calling after him, "Sir, please wait." But by the time she reached the lot, he was gone. No car, no trail. She stood there alone, breathless and shaking. That night, she told her father what happened. Thomas's expression darkened. He didn't ask who the man was. Instead, he asked what Anna remembered about him. Hair, build, clothes, everything. When she was done speaking, Thomas stood silently for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Anna, do you remember Uncle Charles?" She blinked. Charles, Margaret's stepbrother, the man who'd come to the house the day after she vanished, the quiet one with the distant smile and soft voice. Anna's eyes widened. She hadn't thought of him in years. "I think that was him," her father said. "At least it sounds like him." He paused, then added, "He hasn't visited us since that week in '95. Not once." They sat in silence for several minutes. the air heavy with the weight of unspoken questions. Didn't make sense. Charles had always seemed mild, if a little awkward, not dangerous, not someone who could. Now that wasn't possible, was it? Anna did what any teenager in 2003 would do. She turned to the internet. She searched his name, his town, any records she could find. Not much turned up. No arrests, no lawsuits. But there were hints, mentions in public directories. A property listed under his name on the outskirts of Grants Pass, and something else, a phone listing that hadn't been disconnected. She wrote it all down. A week later, they drove out their Thomas and Anna. 2 hours from Ashfield into rural farmland and tree-lined back roads. They didn't stop at the house. They just drove. Past it was a one-story ranch with faded shutters and a tall wooden fence along the back. The yard was overgrown. A single car sat in the driveway, silver with out-of-state plates. No movement inside. Anna stared at the curtains, hoping, fearing they'd twitch. Thomas took a long breath and gripped the wheel tighter. "We need to talk to someone," he said. And so began the second investigation, quieter than the first, but no less urgent. Thomas went to the local police, told them about the mall sighting, about Charles, about the property. He didn't accuse, just reported suspicious behavior. But the case was old, the details vague, and there was no proof of any crime. The officer promised to make a note of it. Anna was furious. "So that's it?" Thomas shook his head. "No. But we have to be careful now." They returned to Ashfield. They waited. And in the meantime, Anna kept watching. 2 weeks later, she saw him again, this time, not at the mall, but at a grocery store 3 towns over. She was leaving with a bag of apples when she spotted him entering from the far end. He didn't see her, or if he did, he didn't show. He walked with purpose, confident, like someone who wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. Anna stepped behind a magazine rack and watched. That's when she saw her Margaret. She stood near the produce section, holding a shopping basket. Her hair pinned up, her frame slightly thinner than Anna remembered, but it was her. Anna's heart raced. She took a cautious step forward. But before she could get closer, Charles returned to her side, leaned in, whispered something, and they quickly turned toward the exit. They left before Anna could follow. But this time, she wasn't alone. An off-duty officer had been at the store, a family friend of Thomas's, someone who knew the case. He recognized Anna's face and the look in her eyes. She ran up and told him what happened. He didn't brush her off. He walked with her to the parking lot and wrote everything down. By the time they got home that evening, something had shifted in the air. For years, Thomas and Anna had lived in a kind of quiet mourning, not moving on, not healing, just learning how to live with a wound that never closed. But now, that wound was throbbing. It had a pulse. And for the first time in a long while, it pointed toward something real. A name, face, a house. Not just grief. Direction. The off-duty officer, Mark Denton, had known Thomas for years. Their boys had played Little League together, Mark remembered. The search for Margaret like it was yesterday, the posters, the vigils, the heartbreak that never quite left their street. When Anna approached him in the grocery store parking lot, breathless and shaking, he took her seriously. "She was right there," Anna said again, as they stood by the soda machines near the exit. "She looked at me. I swear she saw me." But then he said something. They walked off like nothing happened. Mark wrote everything down, her words, a time a description of Charles, Margaret's appearance. Then he looked at Anna with a steady, measured calm. "I'll file a report," he said, "but this needs to be handled quietly. Let's not spook anyone before we understand what's going on." Anna nodded, but inside her nerves were already running wild that night. She and Thomas sat in the living room and replayed the moment from every angle. How Margaret looked, whether she had seemed healthy. Did she seem happy? Not exactly, Anna said. She looked distant. She smiled once, but it felt like she was smiling because he wanted her to. Thomas didn't speak for a long time after that. The next morning, Officer Denton called with an update. He'd spoken with the detective still assigned to cold case. Files in Jackson County. There wasn't much they could do, not yet. But Denton had filed a request to conduct informal surveillance on Charles's property. It wouldn't be a raid or even a visit, just observation. A quiet look at who came and went. "We need more than sightings," he told Thomas over the phone. "We need probable cause. Something solid." Thomas hung up the phone with a quiet sigh and looked at Anna. "You were right," he said, "but we still have to be careful." Anna didn't want to wait. Every second that passed felt like more time lost. But she understood now. This wasn't a sprint. It was a slow climb back toward the truth, and she wasn't climbing alone. Meanwhile, at school, Anna tried to focus, but her mind drifted in every class. She found herself staring at the clock, thinking about her mother's eyes, wondering if Margaret had recognized her too, and if so, why she hadn't stopped, why she hadn't even flinched. Worse, Anna began imagining what her mother's life might have looked like over the past 8 years. Did she celebrate birthdays? Did she still love chocolate cake? Did she ever speak their names aloud? Or had she forgotten them entirely? Afternoon, after biology class, she wandered into the school library and pulled out an old yearbook, her mom's senior year. She sat in a corner, flipping through pages. There she was, young, vibrant, full of light. Margaret Helton, drama club. French honors, voted most likely to be a great mom. Anna stared at the photo until the page blurred. Later that week, Mark Denton called again, his voice lower this time. "I've got something." Through quiet observation and a favor from a local mail carrier, it confirmed that Charles did, in fact, live with a woman. She used a different last name, no Greer, but the age matched, and more importantly, so did the face. One of the surveillance officers snapped a blurry photo through a window, the woman watering plants in the backyard. Hair pulled back, light. Sweater, no makeup, but unmistakably Margaret. Thomas held the photo like it might vanish if he blinked. So, she was alive, and she was living with him. But why? Why would a woman with 3 children, a loving husband, a stable life, disappear in the middle of the night and spend the next 8 years playing house with her stepbrother? Unless she hadn't chosen it, unless something had happened to her, something she hadn't escaped from. Thomas shared his suspicions with Officer Denton, who nodded but kept his expression guarded. "It's possible," he said. "Need to prove it. Right now, all we have is sightings and speculation." So they waited, quietly watching. Then one night the unexpected happened. It was a Monday. The sky had turned that deep gray-blue color that warned of rain, and Anna was sitting on the porch after dinner. That's when she saw the Casa Silva sedan. It slowed as it approached their driveway, then paused. Anna stood up. The driver's window rolled down. Inside, a face leaned forward. "It was Charles, Anna," he called out, almost cheerfully. "Is your father home?" She froze. Everything about him looked familiar and wrong at the same time. The same eyes, same calm voice. But beneath it all was something off, like a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong space. Thomas came out seconds later, stepping between Anna and the car. "Charles," he said flatly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Charles smiled, small, tight, just passing through. "Thought I'd say hello." Anna's heartbeat thundered in her chest. Thomas kept his stance still. "You've been in town for a bit," Charles said. "Margaret sends her regards." Just like that, he said her name as if it were normal, as if she hadn't disappeared. "For 8 years, as if this were a neighborly visit." "She's well," Charles added. "Doing better than she has in a long time." Thomas said nothing. He didn't blink. "Well," Charles said, shifting the car into drive, "you take care." And just like that, he was gone. Anna turned to her father. "What was that?" Thomas shook his head. "Something's happening. He knows we're looking." The next morning, Denton filed a formal report. That visit, uninvited and unprompted, changed things. It suggested contact, awareness, possibly even a threat. Now they had something probable cause. Denton moved the case forward, and by the end of that week, a court approved a quiet welfare check at the property in Grants Pass. But the night before they could go, Margaret vanished again. The day after Charles drove away, the house didn't feel the same. Thomas began locking the back door earlier than usual, double-checking the latches on the windows. Anna noticed the change in his posture, his steps slower, his jaw tighter. Something in him had shifted, like a quiet alarm had gone off inside. He didn't say it aloud, but Anna could feel it. They weren't just being watched. They had been warned. And Margaret Shee was gone again. No one knew where. Officer Denton reached out to his contact in Grants Pass, who confirmed the house appeared empty, mail still being delivered, lights off every evening. It was like someone had packed up in a rush. No forwarding address, no movers, nothing. Thomas didn't press for more, neither did Anna. Instead, life began folding back into its awkward routine, or at least the illusion of it. Anna returned to school, Thomas went back to work, but there was always that question they couldn't shake. What if that was the last time they ever saw her? Still, something didn't sit right. Why had Charles come all the way to their house? Why now? What had he gained by showing his face again? Confirming Margaret's presence, confirming that she was alive. Unless he wasn't hiding anymore, unless he believed he didn't have to. Anna wrestled with that thought for days. Then came the letter. It was delivered without a return address. A plain white envelope slipped into the family's mailbox on a Saturday morning. Thomas found it. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, stiff, blocky, like someone trying to write neatly, but with a trembling hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed, "Please stop looking for me. I am safe. I left on my own. There's no need to keep asking questions. Let me live in peace." No name, no location, no signature. But Anna recognized the phrasing, those exact words. They matched something her mother used to say when she was overwhelmed. "Let me live in peace." She'd whisper under her breath when the kids were yelling, or when dinner was burning on the stove. That wasn't a phrase people just copied. It was her. Thomas sat with the letter for over an hour, barely speaking. Then he quietly folded it, placed it back into the envelope, put it in the shoebox with the rest of the case. "I don't buy it," Anna said. "I don't either," Thomas replied. And yet there was nothing they could do. No law had been broken. No one could force Margaret to come forward, not if she claimed to be acting of her own will. But something about that note, the tone didn't match. It read like someone who had been told what to say, not someone who chose the words freely. Days passed, then weeks. Autumn crept in, with colder mornings and longer shadows. Anna's friends asked fewer questions about her summer mystery, assuming she'd gotten it wrong, that it had been a look-alike. A case of hope-clouded judgment. Even her teachers began treating her more gently, like she was someone who'd almost found her mother and now just needed time to accept that she hadn't. But Anna wouldn't let it go. She started journaling every detail she remembered from the grocery store, the mall, the house in Grants Pass. She drew the backyard from memory. She even sketched Margaret's expression when she turned her head just slightly to listen to Charles. She wasn't imagining that something was off. One evening in mid-November, Thomas received a phone call from a local pastor. Nothing urgent. "Just something strange," the pastor said. "I was visiting a neighboring church last Sunday, and during coffee hour a woman came in with a man, quiet, polite. She didn't speak much, but she looked familiar, and I remembered the poster Margaret from years ago." Thomas's heart clenched. "Are you sure?" "Not entirely," the pastor admitted. "She wore glasses, hair shorter now, but the resemblance was enough to catch my breath." "Where was this?" "A church north of River Bend. Small congregation, maybe 20 people." Thomas wrote it down. The next morning he didn't go to work. He and Anna drove out to River Bend, not to confront, not to chase, just to watch. Sat in the parking lot of the small church for 2 hours. A few people came and went, but no Margaret, no Charles. Maybe they'd already left. Maybe they never planned to stay long. Still, Anna noticed something. The church kept a weekly bulletin on a corkboard near the door. She walked up to look. There was nothing unusual: schedules for choir, announcements for soup kitchens, a bake sale. But one flyer caught her attention. It was for a community support. Group 4 people recovering from memory loss due to accidents, trauma, or illness. Anna stared at the print. She remembered a conversation from years ago her grandmother had once. Mentioned Margaret having dizzy spells after a fall as a child, a minor concussion, nothing serious, but it had made her sensitive to stress. What if no? It still didn't. Explain 8 years of silence. It didn't explain the strange letter. It didn't explain Charles unless something had happened to her memory. Anna didn't say it aloud. Not yet. But a seed had been planted. Winter came in quieter that year. Riverbend saw its first frost in mid-December, and with it came a kind of stillness. Not just in the trees, but in the way people moved, spoke, remembered. Anna felt it most during the mornings, standing by the living room window before school, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out at the front lawn waiting for something, anything to shift. It had been weeks since their trip to the church, no new sightings, no anonymous letters, no calls from Charles. It's the steady ticking. Silence of waiting. And yet, something had changed. Not outside, but in them. It was like a crack had formed in the surface of their grief. Not hope exactly, but a kind of sharpening. The confusion, the ache, it all felt more defined now, closer. Anna found herself rereading old notes from the early days of her mother's disappearance. Back then, she'd kept a notebook, drawings, quotes, memories. It had started as a child's way of remembering, but now she read it like evidence. There were little things she'd never noticed until now. Margaret had been acting distant in the months leading up to her vanishing. Not cold, never cold, but preoccupied. She would stare at her reflection in the kitchen window while washing dishes, or pause while brushing her youngest son's hair, as if she'd forgotten what came next. Anna remembered once walking in on her mother, sitting on the floor of her closet, not crying, just sitting, staring at a small photo she never shared with anyone. Back then, Anna didn't ask. Now, she wondered every day. It was during winter break that things began moving again, not dramatically. It's not suddenly, but with the quiet weight of inevitability. Thomas received a call from a woman named Elise, who ran a memory therapy clinic about 40 minutes outside town. She wasn't calling about Margaret directly, not at first, but she had read the church bulletin and heard, from a mutual contact, that the Heltons were looking for someone who might match a certain profile. "We have a client," Elise said. "I won't give her name, can't, but she fits some of the things you've described, and I'm concerned." Thomas asked why. "Gosh, she doesn't know who she is," Elise said. "She believes she's lived here most of her life, but her records only begin 8 years ago, and they're incomplete." That was enough. Thomas didn't tell Anna right away. Made the trip first, alone, unsure of what he even hoped to find. Elise met him at the front desk. The clinic was small, built into what used to be an old farmhouse. Soft music played from overhead speakers. It smelled faintly of chamomile and lemon. "I'm not going to let you see her," Elise said plainly. "Not yet, but I will answer questions." Thomas nodded. He understood. Elise explained the basics. The woman came in after what appeared to be a long period of isolation. She had been living under the care of a relative, she said. But something had happened to Fall, a panic episode, and now she was trying to rebuild her memory. "She's fragile," Elise said, "but intelligent and kind. Sometimes I think she's beginning to suspect the truth, but she doesn't quite trust herself." Thomas finally asked the only question that mattered. "Does she have children?" Elise didn't answer immediately. She walked to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a sketch charcoal pencil on rough paper. It was crude but clear. A woman with 3 children, 2 girls, 1 boy, standing in front of a swing set. "She draws them over and over," Elise said. "Different clothes, different scenes, but it's always the same 3. Thomas held the sketch like it was made of glass. "It's her," he whispered. Back home, Anna sat on the floor of her room, flipping through a photo album she hadn't touched in years, the kind with plastic sleeves and handwritten dates scribbled beside every image. There was one photo in particular she kept staring at. Her mom laughing in the backyard, her hands covered in birthday cake frosting. Thomas had snapped it mid-motion, and it was blurred slightly, but Margaret looked alive in that picture, not just smiling, present. Anna tried to imagine what 8 years without that face must have been like. Then she imagined the same amount of time without memory. The thought made her stomach turn. When Thomas returned, he didn't speak for a while, until Anna came downstairs and found him sitting in the dark with the drawings still in his hands. "She remembers you," he said. Anna froze. "She doesn't know it yet," he continued. "She draws you, you and the others. Well, she's been doing it for years. Anna stepped forward, slowly, carefully, as if the wrong word would shatter whatever fragile miracle had just arrived. Where is she? I don't know, Thomas said. She's somewhere safe, somewhere people care for her, but Charles's been keeping her hidden. I think he's been medicating her just enough to keep the memories out of reach. Anna clenched her fists. It wasn't just that he had taken her mother. It was that he'd convinced her she didn't have a family, that the children in her drawings were only ghosts from a dream. I want to see her, Anna said. We will, Thomas replied, but not like this. We have to do it right. That night, Anna didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling until the first light crept through her window. Then she got up, pulled her old journal from under the bed, and began a letter not to her mom, to Charles. She didn't know his address. She didn't know if he'd even read it. But something inside her needed to be said. Something more than rage, more than heartbreak. It was the kind of letter a daughter writes not to be answered, but to be heard. She signed it quietly, folded it, and placed it on the windowsill. Just in case someone, somewhere, was still watching. The wind was sharp that morning. Thomas stood in front of the kitchen window, watching the leaves swirl across the backyard. He barely noticed the cup of coffee cooling in his hand. Behind him, the walls of the once lively house seemed too quiet now, too polite in their stillness. It had been weeks since Anna saw her mother, a year since she vanished. But now it wasn't just pain, it was confusion. Why had Margaret been with Charles? Why had she looked so normal? Why hadn't she said anything? That single sighting had appended everything Thomas thought he knew about his wife's disappearance. In the dining room, Lee spread out a map across the table. Pins, strings, circles. She'd gone into full research mode, tracking traffic cameras, bus lines, abandoned properties, private rentals. Every piece of public data she could find, she logged. She'd even quietly reached out to a contact in missing persons off the record. He's been moving, she murmured, tapping her pen near a rural county west of Sacramento. Staying no more than 3 months in one place. Always cash, no paper trail. Thomas barely looked up. She saw her mother 8 years later, and she was smiling with him. Elise hesitated. She might not have wanted to be found. No, he said firmly. No, that's not who Margaret was. But the words hung in the air. Even he didn't fully believe them anymore. Anna sat on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. She replayed the moment over and over, the food court, the soft lighting, the sound of her little brother giggling in the stroller. Then the glance, her mother, her face, her walk, that small smile like she was at peace. Anna had gasped, moved toward her, but Charles had noticed. He whispered something in Margaret's ear. She turned, then they disappeared into the crowd. Not a single glance back, not a flicker of recognition, not even a hesitation. Anna didn't know what was worse, that her mother might not have seen her, or that maybe she did and chose to walk away. Detective Karen Madsen, now months into the reopened investigation, rubbed her temples at her desk. She had interviewed family, teachers, neighbors. Margaret's former co-workers, no enemies, no mental health flags, no signs of an affair. Nothing except for Charles, Margaret's stepbrother. He'd visited occasionally in the year before. She vanished, never stayed long, polite, distant, no record of employment, lived alone, always off-grid. Madsen tapped the file again. He'd shown up the morning after Margaret disappeared, said he came to support the family. No one thought to question it until now. Meanwhile, Charles was already gone. Whatever address the utility company had for him was cold. He'd rerouted the bills, used fake names, registered P.O. boxes under rental units. Each time the authorities closed in, he shifted. New grocery store, new license plates, new clothes for Margaret. He'd learned how to keep her quiet, not by force, but by structure, the routine, the gentle, patronizing comfort, the medications she never questioned, the partial truths he fed her like lullabies. He spoke carefully, never said too much, always. A smile, always a warm hand on her shoulder. From the outside, they looked like any ordinary couple, and to the few who passed them by, that's all they ever were. Elise found something odd in an archived tax listing, a small clinic in Woodland Pines. Now, burned down, had received anonymous donations from a C. Halderman. Close to Charles's real last name, though slightly changed. She dug further. Receipts, property tax logs, a mailing address, a P.O. box in a tiny town near the foothills. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. "Thomas," she called. He leaned over. She pointed at the records. "Could be a match." Thomas nodded. "We drive tomorrow." That night, Anna couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, watching shadows stretch across the backyard. In her lap was an old family photo, her mother sitting on the porch steps, holding the youngest arms around her daughters. Anna stared at her mother's face and whispered to the dark, "Why would you leave us?" The family began a quiet search of towns off Route 86, using disguises, fake names, and small-town motels to keep from being noticed. They checked small grocery stores, vintage shops, rural clinics, flea markets. At one stop, a store clerk said she remembered a couple like that. The woman didn't talk much. The man was protective, never let her out of sight. "Did she ever say her name?" Elise asked. The clerk shook her head but said, once she said she saw her looking at a little girl in the store, staring, didn't blink, like she was trying to remember something. Thomas's breath caught. "What happened?" The man came back, touched her shoulder. She looked away. Elise stared at the clerk. "Where was this?" The woman pointed down the road. 2 towns over. That was maybe 4 or 5 months ago. Too late, they were gone again. Behind the glass of an old bookstore window, security camera caught grainy footage. A woman with medium-length hair, sweater pulled tight, standing by a shelf of children's books. She was holding a paperback in her hand, frozen, reading or remembering. A man appeared behind her, took the book, guided her away. The timestamp read 11:38 a.m., 4 minutes before Anna had arrived at the same store. And once again Margaret slipped through their fingers. Charles stayed ahead. He always did. He had learned how to listen without looking, watch without being seen, move without echo. And Margaret, she was still by his side, still quiet, still unseen to the world, to the family, to the authorities. They were ghosts, and no one knew if she was choosing to stay hidden or being kept in the dark. Odd. But that answer, the one they'd all been aching for, was just 3 steps away. It just hadn't caught up with them yet. The motel room was quiet, save for the distant hum of the highway outside. Thomas lay on top of the covers, arms crossed behind his head, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The weak light from the cracked blinds stretched across the carpet like a silent reminder of how long they'd been searching and how little they had found. Anna sat at the edge of the bed with an old sketch pad in her lap, flipping pages without really seeing them. Each drawing, made when she was younger, was an attempt to bring back her mother, her hair, her eyes, the way she used to tilt her head when she laughed. But now those memories felt too far away, faded, like the drawings themselves. "Do you think she knows who we are?" Anna finally asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I want to believe she does." She looked happy, Anna said, her voice quiet, nearly a whisper. She didn't look scared, not kidnapped, not trapped. Elise, sitting at the motel desk, closed her laptop. She'd been searching through old real estate sales again, digging into Pattern's burner phones, cash leases, short-term rentals, anything that matched Charles's behavior. So far, nothing stuck. "Sometimes," Elise said gently, "people don't need chains to be prisoners. You just need someone convincing enough." Anna turned to look at her. "But what if she doesn't want to come back?" Thomas sat up slowly. "It's not Margaret." "But what if she's not the same person anymore?" Anna asked. No one responded. 3 days passed. They drove through another town, another lead, another small gas station where someone maybe remembered a woman who looked like Margaret. Came in once a week, the cashier said, chewing on a toothpick. Didn't talk much, always looked like she was thinking about something far away. Thomas leaned forward. "Was she with anyone?" Tall guy, kind of intense. Didn't let her wander much. "Did she ever seem scared?" "No," the man said, thinking not scared, just dull, like something was missing in her. like she was only half alive. A new pin on their growing map, but it still didn't bring them closer.
Ow.
Detective Madsen called Elise that evening. We checked surveillance footage from a discount pharmacy in Beckett County last month. I think it's them. She emailed over the still. A woman stood near a shelf of vitamins, a basket in hand. Her hair was pulled back, her posture stiff. A man stood 3 feet away, watching her, his hand gripping the cart like it might float away if he let go. Same sweater, Thomas said. Same build. But look at her face, Elise said. She's not smiling. She's not looking at anything. She looks empty. Anna stared at the photo for a long time. She didn't used to be that way. No, Thomas said quietly. She didn't. 2 weeks later, another near miss. A tip led them to a rental cabin in Sierra Hills, remote, surrounded by woods. The owner, a retiree who rented it for cash under the table, remembered a couple fitting the description. Stayed 6 weeks, paid in advance, left with no warning. They didn't talk much, he said. She always wore long sleeves, even when it was hot. Did she ever talk to you? Once, he replied. Asked if I had a phone she could use. I told her the landline in the office worked, but then he came in and said they'd already made a call. She never asked again. Later that night, Elise stood outside the motel room with Anna. The air was cool, the sky hazy with thin clouds. They leaned against the railing overlooking the empty parking lot. You think she's forgotten us? Anna asked. Elise looked at her, pained. I think someone made her forget or tried to, Anna nodded slowly. I keep wondering if I had run faster that day in the mall, if I had shouted, if I had chased her. You were just a kid, Elise whispered. You did everything. Right, Anna blinked hard. I don't know anymore. Charles had changed homes again. A new town, a new name on the lease, a new cover story. This time, they were husband and wife. She called him Richard now and didn't seem to question why. Margaret didn't resist because she didn't know how. She hadn't known anything outside of this life for years, and Charles knew exactly how. To keep it that way, the medication milder now, just enough to keep her docile. The curated environment, the lies. She used to be sick, he'd told the neighbors. Poor thing, but she's better now.
Oh.
She just needs quiet.
And
when she would look out the window a little too long, he would gently bring her back. To the couch, to the tea, to the sound of his voice, to the world he'd built. Back at home, Detective Madsen had been quietly working with a tech team to trace Charles's online behavior. It wasn't easy. He used library computers, public Wi-Fi, burner phones, but there were slip-ups. One recent IP address pinged from a shipping site, a delivery to a P.O. box registered under a fake name in a mountain town called Redfield. She sent the update to Elise. Thomas stood behind her, reading the email aloud. This is it, he said. They packed again. This time when they arrived in Redfield, the fog was thick and the town felt still. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out. Thomas visited the post office and inquired about the P.O. box under a false name. The clerk hesitated. We don't give out that information. Elise slipped a photo across the counter, an old photo of Margaret holding baby Claire smiling. On the porch, the woman softened. I've seen her, she whispered, but not recently. Maybe 3-4 days ago. Thomas's heart leaped. She's here? Anna asked, her voice cracking. Or was, the woman said. They keep to themselves, but they come in sometimes. He always does the talking. Later that night, Thomas sat alone in the motel room. He took out the old camcorder from the drawer. It hadn't worked in years, but he held it like a relic. Inside was the last home video of Margaret, the one she had made a week before she vanished, her voice warm and teasing, calling the kids to dinner, the camera swaying as she laughed. He closed his eyes and played it from memory. I miss you, he whispered, every day. Charles, now alert to the shifting presence in town, packed their bags again. The blinds were drawn, the truck was ready. He watched from the window as a black car passed slowly by. He knew they were close. He had to move again. Margaret sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap, staring at a page in a children's book. It had no pictures, just faint pencil marks. Scribbles she didn't remember making. Charles called to her, Time to go, sweetheart. She stood without a word. He held the door open, and together they disappeared into the dark once more. The sky above Redfield was overcast the next morning, casting a pale gray wash over the streets. Elise sat in the car outside the diner, her coffee gone cold in the cup holder. She had parked there since 6:30 a.m., hoping again that maybe they'd see her. But by 9, no sign, no Charles, no Margaret Just. Local shopkeepers in a sleepy town that already seemed ready to forget what little it knew. Thomas was a few blocks away, walking the perimeter of an old RV park where they'd heard a couple might have checked in under cash no ID. No questions asked. It was always the same now. Hushed descriptions, faded memory, vague timelines. Farther Charles ran, the more he covered his tracks. And somehow he was always one step ahead. Anna sat in the back of the car, her knees pulled to her chest, flipping through a photo album of their childhood. Every picture of her mom felt like a fading page in a book no one had finished. She wouldn't just disappear forever, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Didn't, Elise said. She was taken, and she's being kept. But if that was true, then why did she walk freely beside him? Why did she look calm? Back in the hills east of town, Charles stood outside a cabin in a new place, just for a few nights. No neighbors, no mail, a rental under a friend of a friend's. Name one of the few threads from his younger, more chaotic life he hadn't burned completely. Inside, Margaret sat at the edge of a small cot, dressed, her hands folded in her lap, a faint wrinkle in her brow. She'd asked no questions today, no comments about the town, no remarks about moving again. She seemed to drift, just like always. But still, Charles watched her carefully. Too many near misses, too many people, too close. He couldn't afford one mistake. Detective Matson called Elise again, her voice more focused now. We tracked Charles's burner phone using a spoof tower hit from earlier this week. Looks like it bounced through Redfield, then into a small nearby town, Hemming Ridge. Hemming Ridge, Thomas repeated. It's only 30 miles from where we are now. Exactly, Matson said. And it's a dead zone, no cell coverage, no cameras, no signals. If he's hiding her again, it's probably there. That evening, as the wind picked up through the mountains, Elise and Thomas drove the long gravel road toward Hemming Ridge. The road narrowed as it curved. Trees thickened. Isolation pressed against the windows, and then brake lights ahead. A delivery truck stalled on the roadside. As they passed, Elise's gaze caught a flash of something in the driver's mirror face, half lit, watching. Could have been nothing, but her gut said otherwise. Meanwhile, Charles guided Margaret down a narrow stairwell beneath the cabin. He never let her see the locks, never let her hear the backup generators click on. But this time, she paused. There was a drawing in her hand, old, childish, family of 5. A woman with brown hair, 2 girls, 1 boy, a tall man. She didn't remember drawing it, but it was folded under the mattress when she woke that morning. "Where did I get this?" she asked softly. Charles gently took it from her fingers. "It's just something the last tenant left." She blinked slowly, nodding, but her brow furrowed just slightly a new wrinkle. He noticed, and he worried. The next morning, Elise and Thomas visited a small diner in Hemming Ridge, dusty, outdated, mostly empty. Thomas approached the counter with a photo of Margaret, aged up. The waitress frowned, then nodded slowly. That lady, she came in 2 days ago. Sat right there, seemed lost. "With a man?" Elise asked. "Yeah, kind of stiff guy, protective. Didn't let her talk much. He ordered for her." Thomas swallowed hard. "Do you know where they went?" "No idea. But she kept looking at the exit, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how." That night, Anna sat by the motel window alone. She remembered the dream she'd had years ago, a recurring one, where her mother came back wearing the same clothes she'd worn the night she'd vanished, same smile, except in the dream. Her mom didn't remember her, just walked right past. That dream came more often now, but something in Anna didn't believe it would end that way. Back in the hills. Charles moved like a shade of a suitcase already packed. Car he hadn't used yet parked 2 cabins down, the keys hidden under a ceramic frog in the garden. He had backup plans for his backup plans. But something was fraying. Margaret didn't ask him to read to her anymore. didn't watch the nature shows he played on VHS. She started sitting in silence. Silence, he'd learned, was dangerous. It meant thoughts, and thoughts were the enemy. He'd moved her before she could form them, again and again. But something told him time was thinning. In town, Elise and Thomas received an anonymous letter, typewritten, no return address. Had one sentence: check the Ridgeview cabins off Fox Hollow Road. They drove immediately, tires crunching through gravel, hearts pounding. But by the time they arrived, the cabin was empty, mattress cold, closet cleared. The only thing left was a children's drawing, the same one Margaret had found. Thomas picked it up and held it like it might shatter. She was here, he whispered. She was so close. 10 miles away, in a different town, Margaret sat on a bench inside a laundromat. She watched the machine spin, a sweatshirt warming her lap. Her fingers gently stroked its threads. She didn't know why, but the color reminded her of something, a memory just out of reach, a smell, a laugh. She closed her eyes. For a second, a girl's voice echoed in her head. Mom. Her eyes snapped open. Across the parking lot, Charles exited a hardware store, carrying a bag. He didn't notice her stillness, didn't see the slow turn of her head toward the road, didn't know that deep inside, something was cracking open. Finally, back in Hemming Ridge, Anna pressed her palms against the table in the motel room. He's not just hiding her, she said. He's controlling her. Thomas nodded. Elise stood up, gripping the photo in her hand. We're not far behind now. He knows it. But Charles knew something too. That people who got too close could be distracted. The cameras could be dodged, that even the deepest suspicions couldn't prove what someone couldn't remember. And until Margaret remembered the truth, she still belonged to him. It was a Wednesday morning when the break finally came, not from a detective, not from a search dog or a tip line, but from a clerk at a budget motel in Northern California, 3 towns away from Hemming Ridge. A man had checked in late, paid in cash, and asked too many questions about exits. The clerk remembered his face. There was something unsettling about how he always glanced behind himself, not just paranoid, but guilty. A police officer quietly passed the details to Detective Madsen. 2 hours later, Charles Whitmore, Margaret's stepbrother, was surrounded in the parking lot of a rundown general store just outside town. He didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't run. In fact, he seemed tired. Back at the station, the air was tense. Elise, Thomas, and Anna waited in the hallway, hearts thudding. They didn't know what would come next. They only knew he had her still, and that she wasn't with him now. Inside the interrogation room, Charles sat in a folding chair, eyes sunken, hands resting quietly on the table. Detective Madsen entered, slid a file across to him. 8 years, she said calmly. It's over now. Charles said nothing, so she tried something else. She had a husband, she said. 3 children, a life. Blinked once. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. You don't understand, he said, voice low. She wasn't supposed to be with him. The words spilled out slowly, like rusted bolts, loosening after years of silence. That night in 1995, Margaret hadn't planned to run. She hadn't packed a bag, hadn't left a note. She'd simply stepped outside their home barefoot, restless, feeling short of breath. Charles had been on his way over, planning to visit after a late shift. He found her collapsed near the mailbox, unconscious, barely breathing. He called no ambulance, didn't go to her husband. Instead, he carried her to his car, drove for hours, and when she woke up in a hospital, her memories gone, he told her the only thing she'd know, that he was her brother, and he'd saved her. Margaret had suffered a stress-induced stroke, temporary memory loss, confused cognition. The doctors had told him recovery was likely, if not certain. But Charles, furious at her husband, jealous of his success, haunted by his own failures, made a decision that would alter every life around him. He told the hospital she had no family, that he was her only kin. A few forged documents, a clean break, and then he took her away. Year after year, he moved her from town to town, changing names, changing her prescriptions, changing their story. He kept her sedated when her mind started questioning. Every time she dreamed of children, he told her they were dreams. Every time she looked longingly at family photos in magazines, he distracted her with road trips. She believed me, he whispered in the interrogation room. Because I never let her remember anything else. Detective Madsen stared at him, jaw clenched. You stole her life, she said. He nodded almost blankly. And when she started remembering, he closed his eyes. I was losing her. Margaret was found within hours in a nearby motel, sitting on a bed, holding a faded drawing of a family of 5. As she looked up, his officers entered confusion in her eyes, then fear, then something else. Recognition. She didn't fight, didn't flee. She simply said, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, I think I know you. She was returned to the station gently, slowly, not as a suspect, not as a fugitive, but as someone waking up from a very long, very dark sleep. Outside the station, Anna waited near the entrance, twisting a bracelet around her wrist. She hadn't cried yet, not fully, not since she saw that figure in the mall all those months ago. The doors opened. Soft breeze passed through, and Margaret stepped out. She looked older, different, but unmistakably her. Anna froze, breath caught in her throat. Margaret's eyes landed on her daughter, and for a second, they just stared at one another, like two people searching for a mirror in a fog. Then Margaret stepped forward, and Anna ran to her, their arms wrapped tight, as if no time had passed. As if memory, no matter how broken, couldn't be kept apart from blood. Inside, Charles sat in a holding cell, his confession recorded, his life now sealed behind bars. He stared at the wall, unmoving. For a man who'd once controlled every step, he was now a ghost of his former self. No one would call him a genius. No one would call him brother. And Margaret, the sister he thought he'd kept forever, was now gone from his grasp. Free Margaret's husband, Thomas, stood quietly on the porch when she finally came home. He didn't rush, didn't speak, just opened his arms. And for the first time in 8 years, the family was whole again, not perfect, not healed, but whole. And for now, that was enough. There were no reporters waiting outside the house anymore. The search vans, the distant cameras, the whispered questions, they had all faded away like fog lifting after a storm. In their place was something else. A quiet morning breeze, backyard swing swaying gently in the wind, and laughter soft, hesitant, but real, coming from the living room. Margaret sat on the floor beside her youngest, now 11, watching as he tried to draw the outline of a flower. He kept getting the petals wrong, but she didn't correct him. She just smiled and traced the missing shape lightly with her finger, letting him take the lead. The reunion hadn't been easy. 8 years lost don't come back in a weekend. Thomas had aged behind his eyes. The kids, once toddlers, now stood nearly at eye level with her. And Margaret, she still woke some mornings unsure where she was. But then Elise would bring her tea, Anna would hand her an old photo album, and, slowly, the pieces of her life stitched themselves together again. There were therapy sessions, school visits, long walks, questions. Some answers, many silences, but the family stayed close. They didn't demand everything from her. They simply gave her space to find it. One afternoon, Margaret stood alone in her old garden, the same place she had vanished from. She looked up at the bedroom window where she once lay beside her husband, then down at the grass where she had collapsed. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was peaceful. She knelt by the tree Thomas had planted the year she disappeared, now grown tall, rooted deep, and ran her fingers over the bark. Time had passed, but not everything was lost. Some things just took the long way home. A week later, the entire family sat together for a new photo, not to replace the old, but to honor it. Margaret held Anna's hand. Thomas had his arm around her shoulders, and the youngest leaned his head on her knee. The photographer adjusted the lens. Everyone smiled. And for the first time in 8 long years, Margaret smiled too. Because memory can be stolen, time can be taken, but love, when true, always finds its way back, even from the longest silence, even after the deepest loss, even after 8 years.